Hey guys, I'm Beck Cranford and I'm a woman who preaches. And today we're going to dive a little bit more into the book of Ephesians, which, as we know, may not have been Ephesians at all. It was potentially the book of Laodiceans. But again, we don't know. It didn't have a title in the earliest archaeological records. We do know that it was circulated widely. The scholar Bart Ehrman considers it Deutero-Pauline, so kind of from a school of Paul, trying to mimic Paul or use Paul to gain credentials. The epitaph written by Paul authorship, that wasn't added until much later. In the earliest historical records, the book is without a title. I do want to talk a little bit about kind of the theology of Ephesus, but more so the context of, the theology of Ephesians in the context of Ephesus. I really like what N.T. Wright has to say, who's a conservative scholar, who suggests that if Ephesians was in wide circulation in the Middle Ages, that the doctrines of hell and trying to figure out the afterlife wouldn't have been so important and based in fear and guilt if they really looked at Ephesians and how it ordered its life to bring heaven on earth, or how to live with one another on earth. So I do enjoy that perspective. Again, as Bart Ehrman said, this was probably Deutero-Pauline, so maybe from a Pauline cult. And I also enjoy that perspective. It's pretty fun. When we look at the historical context of Ephesus, there's a lot that's going on there. Ephesus was historically in Anatolia and the home of the Hittites, who were wiped out hundreds of thousands of years before kind of the boom of Christianity. However, I do want to talk a little bit about the Hittites. Some of you will recognize them as one of the 7 nation armies, which, by the way, right now that song is playing in my head, and it's so amazing. And also, when we talk about the 7 nation armies, when we look at the book of Joshua is basically a taunt song. So when we look at Joshua, it's very poetic, and it's kind of like a cheer, like rah, 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 my team is good, my team is awesome, your team sucks, kind of a situation going on there. And in that book, we hear them say things like, all these enemies of God are utterly destroyed. I want to let you know that Joshua did not go in and commit genocide. These people groups still exist, have moved on. Empires come and fall, but the people continued. We see that Jesus talks later to the Canaanite woman, and in one of the other Gospels, the Syrophoenician woman, and these were some of those 7 nation army descendants. So Joshua is a taunt song. It's kind of a cheer. It's not historical. It is very much a theological kind of, empowering thing to say, hey, our God is bigger than your God, sort of situation, like my dog's bigger than your dog, my dog's going to win, that kind of thing like that. So that's what's going on in Joshua. Let's get back to Ephesus. When I talked about the Hittite, what's really interesting is when we see Ephesus, and if you look at Acts 19, you'll see Demetrius flare up against Paul and some of the disciples, and just stir up a bunch of strife for him over some economic reasons, because Demetrius was a silversmith and was basically fashioning idols there for the temple of Artemis in Ephesus. And Artemis wasn't the only god that was worshipped in Ephesus at the time when Paul would have went through there, or other disciples in the early fledgling church. There were many, and the Caesar cult was really a big thing, like kind of worshiping of Caesar. As a matter of fact, early Christians were called atheists because they did not, in fact, believe in the God of the state. So it was kind of a joke. It was like a smear to call Christians atheists, if that makes sense, just because they didn't believe in the stately God. I just want to quickly talk a little bit about Artemis and kind of the economic system of the temples of Ephesus. This was big money. This brought in a lot of money. Now, the difference of Artemis of Ephesus versus Artemis the hunter in Greek mythology is that Artemis of Ephesus is probably an amalgamation of other ancient gods and kind of some feminine deities there. Ephesus is very important when we look at church history as well. We find out later that it is where there were several councils that came about, specifically one in which Cyril came along and talked about the divinity of God. Some people suggest that it is the home of where Mary, the mother of God, and John actually stayed at. And there's some basilicas there, some ancient churches back to the Byzantine era that were founded in their name. So fun and interesting stuff on Ephesus, and we'll dive back more into Scripture later. Remember, you can be a Christian and not check your brain at the door, and you can be a Bible nerd and not a Bible bigot. Thanks.